Welcome to episode 106 of the Sports Business Classroom audio experience. Today's episode is from a previously recorded webinar hosted by Bobby Marks, SBC lead instructor and ESPN NBA front office insider, Eric Pincus, SBC instructor, salary cap strategist and writer for Bleacher Report, as well as SBC instructor Steven Alves. They go on to discuss the recent October 21st, 2024 deadline for rookie and veteran extensions, along with final roster submissions ahead of the 2024-2025 NBA season opener. They dive deep on which players of the 2021 draft class did and did not sign an extension, veterans that signed an extension and are still extension eligible, key roster decisions, and also answer questions from webinar attendees. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a fantastic discussion between our hosts, and I have no doubt that you will find this episode extremely helpful and informative.
Thank you all for coming. If you're here, we'll sort of let people trickle in before we really start digging into the meat, but I am Eric Pincus of Sports Business Classroom, also with Bleacher Report, and we are here to talk about the season upcoming, which starts tomorrow. We're recording this on Monday, right after the rookie extension deadline, and we have later tonight, a couple hours or so, the veteran extension deadline. We have some final roster decisions, and to help break it down, we have Bobby Marks, our lead instructor at Sports Business Classroom, also with ESPN, and Steven Alves, also one of our fantastic instructors, to break down what happened today, what might happen, what it means. Gentlemen, welcome.
How are we doing?
We're good. So, Bobby, we want to give people a minute or two before we really dive in. But was there anything right off the bat with this extension deadline that sort of surprised you?
Well, Draymond didn't get suspended, right? Usually, when Eric and I do these webinars, Draymond always gets suspended. So we've done two of them last year, and that same night, suspension amount came out. So besides that. And I said this on TV, I think Friday when I was on, or maybe Thursday, I thought we might be trending towards the low end from an extension total, just because we were at 4 right off the bat this summer. I think it was right when we were doing Sports Business Classroom in Las Vegas, the 4 guys that signed max extensions. And then we didn't have anything, which is usually the norm, picks up right before the deadline, which was 6 o'clock today. I thought we were going to hit 8. We got to 11. But that was probably the biggest thing, is that I thought we saw more than what I was expected.
Okay. All right. Steven, as well, anything that jumped out at you without getting too deep, because we're going to dig into all this, but just give a taste of what's to come.
Yeah, I think Houston surprised me today. I didn't know if we were going to see anything get done specifically with Jalen Green. Listening to Houston's the media day stuff, I think when you heard them talk about kind of Jalen's status and kind of where they were with that, I didn't think we were going to get a deal done. But hearing him get that 2+1, I thought was very interesting. So that kind of jumped out at me. But good for them getting it locked down. I know they really wanted that core to stay together, so they're there now.
Well, one of our instructors, Seth Partnow, had very strong words on Twitter/X.
I didn't go on and see it.
Oh, yeah. He is irate and disliking that for the team. And I think we can get into some of I still want to get people to get in, and we'll get to it. I do have some thoughts on like paying Cade or Wagner or some of these guys as much as they did, which obviously happened earlier in the summer. Guys who are right out the gate, first moment you can sign them, boom. Maybe there's a why was that needed factor that I'd like to get into later. But I do want to at least talk to everyone who's just joining us. I see the chat is already bumping. We are personally going to ignore the chat. No offense. We would love to, but we can't also have a conversation. But there is Q&A. So if you pop in a question, we're going to do our spiel. We'll talk. At some point, we'll get to Q&A, and we'll try to answer questions there. So we'll peek at the chat, but we'll probably miss it. But please chat with each other and point out to us like if we're saying something crazy or incorrect. Not every report that came out is accurate. So, we were just chatting about the Aaron Gordon thing. So maybe there's going to be further clarity on exactly what he extended for that we don't know because we're not scouring the internet or our contacts. This will also be recorded and turned into an on-demand podcast episode on Sports Business Classroom audio experience. So if you want to watch it later, or if you have somebody that you want them to see this, you can always pass it on at a later time. I do see some friendly names of some former students, recent students. I'm glad you're all here. I see Vikas, Mohammed. I think I saw Mason. And if I'm pronouncing them wrong, it's too late. I've known you now probably for months, and I'm still going to say it wrong. So, but yes, we are, I think, at a point where we can sort of dive into the content. So I know, Bobby, that we wanted to sort of break down some of the structure of how this works. We're kind of like, why is today significant? What is the meaning? So I think we have some slides for that as well. So I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, I mean, we basically have 3 buckets or tiers as far as when we're looking at extensions. Monday was significant, which is certainly the day before the regular season started because of 2 reasons here. Besides the deadline to submit your rosters to the NBA, which was early this evening. There's the rookie extension deadline, which was at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So that's for players that were selected in the 2021 first round. The deadline was to extend by 6 p.m. You can extend for up to 5 years. You can extend for up to 25% of the salary cap. There are certainly players that were extended this offseason in July: Franz Wagner, Evan Mobley, Cade Cunningham, Scotty Barnes. Those 4 players signed max contracts, which were 5 for $224. And then those players had all NBA language in there that, similar to Tyrese Halliburton and Anthony Edwards, if they hit all NBA, their contract can increase up to 30%. Not all 4 of them have the same language, but those 4 players extended right off the bat in the summer. The rule changed with rookie extensions, where it used to be that only players who signed the maximum, which is 25%, could sign for a 5-year extension. That was changed in the 2023 CBA. Now it gives you flexibility. That's why you see Alperen Sengun signed for 5 for $185. That's not a max contract, but how the rules are now, it gives you the flexibility. So that's the rookie extensions that the deadline has passed. There's also the veteran extensions that we certainly just saw with Aaron Gordon that came in. If you're a player and you're extension eligible, and you can see on the slides here what the criteria is for that extension, and you have 2 years left on your contract, not including if it's a player team option, it's a straight 2 years. So you're looking at De'Aaron Fox, Jaren Jackson, Mikal Bridges, Kevin Durant. Today, which is Monday at midnight, is the last day you are allowed to extend your contract here. If you do not extend, which none of the 4 players did, then you are allowed to start negotiating once the NBA Finals concludes the next day. If you're a player, though, who has 1 year left under contract or 2 years left under contract and it's got a player option or a team option, you are allowed to extend up until June 30th. So there is the more flexibility. Aaron Gordon, who did extend, but he opted into his contract, that means he would have had a midnight deadline tonight. So who are those guys? You're certainly looking at Brandon Ingram, Jimmy Butler, Rudy Gobert. Players like that or either have a player option or in the last year of their contract. So there's different ways that you can look at, from whether it be rookie extensions or veteran extensions. And as you can see on the slide here, it gives you it shows you the criteria that you have to meet if you sign a 3 or 4 year contract, certainly for the veterans here, and as far as the percentage. And we'll show you down the road as far as how to calculate veteran and rookie extensions.
Great. We did have Jaden Hardy extend, and he
Yeah.
is a player who's expiring. So there was no deadline today. He could have done this tomorrow. He could have done this in June. So when these deals come, they come because teams are negotiating as of really since last June. And to be honest, a lot of times the negotiation happens outside of the legal window. So there's a constant negotiation. They reached a deal now, so they did a deal. But the deadline for Gordon was only if he opted in. If he opted out, then he could have signed later, but they reached a deal. And the way it was reported he opted in. I think the numbers are a little funky based on that. He does have some incentives, so I need to look that over a little more closely to really understand what the heck actually he did versus what was reported.
Yeah, I mean, real quick, just to go on the Gordon extension. So it was announced at 4 for 133, and what's being factored in there is the opt-in number at 22.8. The extension is 3 for 104. And then when you factor in maybe some bonuses, unlikely bonuses here, that's where you get up to that 4 for 133 number.
Okay, I guess that makes sense. I'll have to check my math. What I do is I plug in all of these numbers. I have I have projections for this season, next season, and the season after. So to try to get a sense of where obviously the further out you get, the more nebulous it gets, but at least you have a sense of where the league is going. And so I've plugged in everything, and it's really, what's interesting is that the league has gone more towards extensions in this new CBA, and they've gone more for trades. I know there's been some complaint about how trades are more difficult. I would argue they're easier, provided you're not at that upper salary level. It does get harder the higher you go in payroll. But free agency this next summer, with so many players extending last year, so many players extending this year, there's not, number one, there's not a lot of players who are going to be available for free agency. And then there's almost no one with money outside of the Nets. Like, no one's going to have cap room. I mean, it's going to be an odd summer in that. It's a cyclical thing. But my projection is the Nets could have anywhere between 50 to 80 or so $million, depending on who they keep and whatnot. And that's it. Like the Wizards, maybe 20 something million, which is not even a max slot. Certainly teams can trade, and like if a Rudy Gobert opts out, that changes the math. And if Jimmy Butler opts out, but if there's no money for teams to pay because only the Nets have money, why are these guys opting out of all this money? So these are the kind of decisions that are going down today. And I think we summarized it there. Let's go on to the next slide. Let's kind of get through a lot of the rules. And then when we get to the meat of it, I want to bring in Steven to talk a little bit more about the basketball side of it. But Bobby, you have some instructions here on how to calculate the extension. Do you want to walk us through that?
Yeah, so this is for veteran extensions. For the regular rookies, it's basically as we said, it's taking up to 25% of the salary cap. You're not extending off the last year of their contract in their first round contract. So if you're Jalen Johnson and he has a $6 million salary, you're not extending off that. Basically, the league gives you a carte blanche as you can extend up until 25% of the salary cap there. This is the Derek White. So this is a veteran extension here. You are allowed to extend up to 140% off that player's salary. This is Derek White, who extended this past offseason. He met the criteria. He had signed a 4-year contract. He had met the criteria of the second anniversary here. As you could see, 140% off that 18.8 number gives you that 26.5. And then Derek White had some bonuses in there also. If you're looking at it when you're calculating the extension, you're basically, and there are 8% increases. You're not increasing each year by 8%. You're increasing the first year, and then you're basically compounding the raise for each year. So this is kind of an example of how to calculate a veteran extension. If the player's salary is more than the average player salary here, the extension can never be more than the maximum allowed in a season. So if you are a $40 million player and your max number is 46, you won't be able to exceed that. It's basically capped in that there. So this is this is how you look at it from a veteran extension as far as calculating that out.
Right. So that is if a player is making above the average salary. And again, these are for in the case of a rookie scale. When we say rookie scale, if you missed it, those are first round picks after their third year, before the start of their fourth year. They're eligible. So if you're a second round pick, this doesn't apply. If you're a veteran of any kind, if you're just an undrafted player like Alex Caruso type who came in undrafted, none of this applies. So you are then a veteran, and then a veteran is limited to 140% of what they made previously, or if they make below the average salary, then we have a different formula, correct? So let's jump on to the next slide. I hope that's where it takes us. One more. Think. Yes? No?
Yeah.
Yes, that's the one.
Yep. So I'm sorry, I was just starting to answer some questions. So this is what we saw with Jaden Hardy, Jose Alvarado, players that are making below the average. Terrence Mann, I think, was an example too, where you are allowed to extend if you're below the average player salary, you can extend for 140% off that number. As you can see here, if you're so, for example, if you're a player that's making $7 million, well, you're allowed to, and you're extension eligible, you're allowed to extend for 140% of the estimated average player salary. That's where you come up with the calculations here. It's similar to the increases is similar to, as we explained with Derek White, as far as an 8% increase. They're compounded; they're not added each year. So this allows teams that have players in that $8 to $9 million range, or even less, who have basically Andrew Nemhard is a great example, who is on a close to a minimum type contract here, outperforms his contract, then they can reward him the following year with an $18 million plus starting number and an extension.
Right. Andrew Nemhard is actually the minimum. Exactly. He's at 2019. Just under 2.02 million extended, and will start at 18.1. So these are all based on certain EAPs, estimated average player salary, is a number that is given out by the league on June 30th, which is New Year's Eve for the NBA. And so you base that number off of that. But yeah, those are the main extension rules on how you get to these numbers. Everything is negotiable. So you might see Jaden Hardy sign for a number that is $5-ish million a year, is because it's negotiable. So you're not obligated. A team isn't obligated to do so. So let's keep going. Let's go through the slides and knock out the rules, and then we'll kind of. Okay, good. I think we're there.
Yeah.
All right. So this is where I kind of want to start with a question, and I'd like both of you to answer, but Steven, certainly your expertise as well. If you're the Pistons, you have not done anything for the last few years. You've been the worst team in the league. Haven't won a playoff game since, I think, Chauncey Billups was on the team. And you have Cade, who's a very good player, and he is eligible for all of this money. But as we sort of said, like, only the Nets have money next year potentially, and sure, someone else might be able to trade to it. But rookie, offer sheets, restricted free agency, it's rare for a player to leave. What is the motivation here for the Pistons to give out this kind of contract for a good player, but one who to date hasn't really impacted winning?
Yeah. So, Bobby, you want to start, or you want me to?
You can start.
Okay, cool. So when I look at that, I look at two things. One, I look at security, contract security for both parts, getting that out the way now, so it's not something you have to worry about going forward. I think from a player standpoint and from a front office standpoint, if you can knock that off the books right now and not have that be a problem later on, or a problem going into the year, I think that's something that's definitely a positive. And player morale, right? I think Cade Cunningham is probably, I would say, probably undisputedly the best player on Detroit's roster currently. I think when you talk about that and you talk about the steps, if you're Trajan Langdon, if you're Bickerstaff, like, how you want to see him evolve as a leader. I think it's hard to preach that to the rest of the guys on your roster if you don't have him under contract for a while, right? So when they're talking about making sure that he's going to be taking a vocal leadership role, taking a lead by example role coming up to this next season, and their goal is to actually try to get to a play-in spot potentially, um, to me, it's important to make sure that he feels like he's wanted, he knows he's wanted, and there's good synergy between both him, the front office, and ownership from a contract standpoint.
Thank you. I think that's an aspect that when people who are just looking at math and leverage don't take into account, they just see, oh, they didn't have to do it. They could have waited. They should have waited because they could have gotten him for less. Doesn't take into account some of the human factors. Bobby, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I always just look at these extensions, the 4 guys that signed in the summer, like it's like the upside extension. I don't think any of the 4 players are franchise players, including Scotty Barnes. I think teams are banking on, certainly the upside here. I thought that how the rules are and with the apron rules and every dollar counts, that we would see teams negotiate more, certainly with these 4 players. Like instead of I thought we were getting away from the days of just writing a blank check, which, certainly all 4 teams value these guys differently here. But I think, as my colleague Brian Windhorst says, it's the fun max, but I think it's the fun max if that player outperforms their contract. I think if you look at LaMelo Ball in Charlotte, who signed a max a year ago, I mean, he's been hurt. He hasn't lived up to that contract yet. There's still time and everything here, but it's, you're right. I mean, I think that's the big thing. It's like, who are you negotiating against? To basically, give 5 for $225 to one of these 4 players.
Now, the all NBA language from the team point of view, okay, you have, Halliburton is getting more, and that's a little bit harder for the Pacers to build the rest of the team, but they're doing it and they're making moves that work. But if Cade Cunningham to get all NBA, first of all, it's either MVP of the league, defensive player of the year, or all NBA first, second, or third team for him to start climbing. If he was MVP of the league, what would that mean for the Pistons is that they must be a good team to have the MVP of the league. So he's either not going to get it, which is the most likely thing, or he's an incredible player. Defensive player of the year might not be realistic based on what he does, but all NBA is real. And if he ends up one of the top 15 players in the league, I think the Pistons are fine with that. I don't think any of these teams, I guess maybe Mobley could be a defensive player of the year candidate. I can argue Scotty Barnes of the guys listed here is the most likely to make an all-NBA third team. And if they have to pay more, it might make things more difficult. Most of the time when a player gets all-NBA language, it doesn't kick, and it's just a max. And if you're going to max a guy out, so be it. And also, the cap is going to be climbing 10% a year under this new CBA. So from a point of view, these contracts will become lower relative to the cap. If they're going to climb each year by 8%. The cap's going to climb by 10%. So I get it. I don't love that they just do here. Team's been terrible. Max you out to Cade Cunningham. But, to Steven's point, they're setting a precedent. They're saying, this is our guy. They're believing in Cade. It's just, he hasn't always been healthy, and this could backfire. And I'll just point out that it backfired with Ben Simmons pretty lousily with the Sixers. I would argue that it backfired for the Hawks. They got to the conference finals, paid everybody. I forget if they paid him before the conference finals, but they paid Trey. He went, and he's been good, but the team hasn't done a ton. They've been positively mediocre, good enough to make the playoffs, maybe get a round or two. And they overinvested too quickly. So there's no right or wrong other than time, I guess, answering that question. What the Mobley one we've touched on a little bit, Scotty, Wagner, I think they are all in the same bucket as Cade. And if either of you wants to comment on those, please just say so. But I think the Jalen Green one is an interesting one. And it's rare to have a short deal like that, 3 years player option. So in 2 years, he could be done. And if he blows up and outperforms that contract, they've got to pay him sooner or maybe lose him to somewhere else. From a point of view, I haven't spoken to Seth Partnow, our instructor. That is my anticipation. I read one or two tweets, and then I've been working and preparing. My anticipation is that he doesn't like that the team is assuming all the risk because they're paying a lot. And if he doesn't work out, yeah, he's expiring and they could trade him after a year or whatever, or later, when he's in that last year. But then you're probably incentivized. If he's bad or hurt, then you're paying a team. So I think that the team, at least my interpretation of Seth's point, is that the team is taking the risk. The upside is for the player. Anytime it's a player option, it is favorable for the player. They get the choice. It's not a team decision. So, Steven, why don't you give me your thoughts first on Jalen Green? Is this an interesting deal, a good deal, a bad deal?
Yeah. So for the number, when I first saw it, I for sure thought that it was. When I saw it was an option, I thought it was a team option until I actually read into it. The player option thing really, really threw me off just because of the price point, but then also giving him all the leverage in terms of when that third year comes, like you said, if he explodes over the next 2 years, and honestly, with the way that Sengun's been evolving and the way how he made his teammates better last year, I could see it be possible that Jalen Green could outperform how he's been playing in 2 years or in a year. So with that being said, I don't really understand how that came to be, especially when about 2 weeks ago, they were talking about how they were having their conversations weren't as far ahead as Sengun's was. So I was kind of confused on that, but from an agent standpoint and from Jalen Green's standpoint, I mean, that's a fantastic deal for them, without question. I think when we talk about rookie extensions and when we talk about let's say Detroit and Cade, right? You have to think about Detroit being a place, like you said, that hasn't won anything for a while. They have zero culture established now, right? Trajan came in to try to go and fix that, but as of right now, it's not existent. Detroit's going to have a harder time being able to get free agents as opposed to other places. When I look at places like Houston, that's a good destination as a player to want to get traded to, for franchise purposes, for living purposes. So I don't that deal would be something I'd expect more from a Detroit or someplace that's going to have more trouble with stuff like that as opposed to Houston. But I mean, props to Jalen Green, props to CAA, and they got that done. That's big time.
Right. So if you're saying props to the player and props to the agent, the corollary of that is it's not props to the team. Bobby, what's your thought on that?
I thought the contract was signed to be traded in July. I thought that's the reason why it's a short-term deal. It's a manageable number. If they had waited till July, he wouldn't have been able to be traded until December or January. Maybe they could have done a sign and trade. I think it's kind of like a, if Green was traded, he has the flexibility to become a free agent in 2 years. And become, certainly if he outplays his contract and he's not traded, then Houston could lose him for nothing. But my initial impression was, of course, we've never seen this before, right? Eric, you know this. I mean, we never see player options in contracts, rarely. We never see 3-year contracts for guys making $30 million plus. This is kind of a rarity. But by just talking with teams and stuff, that was the one thing, was it was a contract that was signed to eventually be traded.
Interesting. And that's a different perspective. I know that who is it? It was Siakam signed a shorter deal. It was a 4-year deal instead of a 5 when he did Toronto. There are cases where we've had instances of shorter deals. And I know, what was it? Kevin Porter Jr. signed a very interesting, I think, what was it? Shams, when he tweeted, he says one of the most interesting extensions we've ever seen. I'm I mean, maybe one of them, I guess, but it's not the most, because Kevin Porter's was more creative than this, because it had all this kind of non-guarantee language. But I did think it was interesting. Let's say that he was offered, if you're Jalen Green and maybe you're offered 5 years, 150 like Suggs. Let's say that's what the offer was.
Yeah.
Instead, you're getting a shorter deal. So you're sort of betting on yourself. The risk is that you're risking $44 million that you may never earn, but you're also getting $106 million. So you can probably live on that and your family for generations. So there's always sort of a line of where you're willing to bet on yourself and to get out of a contract earlier. Whereas Suggs, I haven't seen his deal, assuming there's no options. There was nothing reported. He's locked in at that number. The team knows exactly what they're going to get. He knows exactly what they're going to get. He can't get more. If he outperforms, he can't get less, or the team can't pay him less if he's hurt or whatever. Whereas Green, we have this variability. So I do think it's an interesting one. I don't think I've digested it fully. I sort of take my time to really look at the actual contract or the details when I get it and look at the team. But I do like Bobby's point of view of maybe it was just signed to be traded. I mean, there's some BYC, like his trade value is a little, he's a poison pill, basically, contract and trade, but that's overcomable. And so we're not going to get into the details. So let's go on to the next slide, see what else we have prepared. We have some more extensions. So we have different tiers of extensions. We have here's everything. That's the Cades. We have the almost maxes, maybe Desmond Bain last year, and maybe I guess Jalen Green and whatnot. You have guys like Jaden McDaniels or Devin Vassell who are making a lot of money, and now we start to get down to this bracket. Now Trey Murphy, Jalen Johnson are sort of getting, and Şengün are getting closer to the McDaniels, Devin Vassell money of last year, and also near the Bain money, which is close to max, but not quite. And then we have Moody and Kispert who are getting in the next tier below, which is probably based on the mid-level exception, which is roughly $13-14 million next year. So you can see why this is what the team paid them. It's about what another team could have paid them to pry them loose. So what are our thoughts? I guess we'll start with Steven again. As much as you can share on Murphy, Jalen, and Şengün. What jumps out?
Yeah. So I'll start with probably Trey and Jalen, and I mean I can kind of go all three, but they're starter caliber guys, I think, and they've proven over the past year. I guess Jalen's been hurt a lot in recent history, but when he's on the floor, he's very effective. Arguably, probably the second, third option on Atlanta's team. So I think that's a really good pickup for them. I think Trey is very similar to Jalen. I mean, when he's on the floor, you see that the team operates very well. I mean, he fits really good with the guys they have in New Orleans. Talking about DeJounte, talking about Zion, talking about Brandon. When Trey's there, he's interchangeable, and really, he's honestly positionless. So that's huge. And then Şengün, just going back to what we were just talking about on the last slide, he showed last year he has a really unique ability to make his teammates better, especially offensively while he's on the floor. So I think that's the consistent thing that you see with a lot of these guys that are rookie extensions. When they're on the floor, they do things to help their teammates elevate their play. And I think that's important, especially when you're looking at locking guys down long term. It's not just about the numbers you're going to put up, it's about the impact you're going to have while you're on the floor as well. I think a lot of these guys, especially the higher number guys, have all shown and proven that they can do that at a high level, especially for their experience in the league.
What's your thought, Bobby, on I'm trying to figure out why we missed 18 and 19. We went from 17 to 20. What's Jalen Johnson, Şengün, and
those
Murphy?
are their draft picks.
Oh, those are their draft numbers? Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
I really like Jalen Johnson, especially that it's 5 over 150, which is 30. It's 30 across the board flat. It's funny. I have a post extension article up on ESPN.com, and I had written about Jalen Johnson because if he did not get extended, and I wrote that by not extending him, it was going to cost Atlanta significantly more next offseason, I thought, just based on kind of where his upside is. with everything. I thought Moody and Kispert right at like the non-tax mid-level, which is 14-ish somewhere, maybe a little bit less. Sengun is really good, plus he gets a player option in the last year. I think he could have waited till next off season and maybe tried to get an offer sheet, but it would have been, at 4 years. It's, Eric, it's hard to turn down 185 million. I mean,
it's crazy. Yeah.
When you have that staring down at you, so you can make an extra 30. God,
and they gave him a player option.
Yeah, and he had an injury at the end of the year. So I totally get that. Trey Murphy's extension is really, that was one of the first ones today. Trey Murphy's really good. And that's going to set up the, we'll probably talk about some of these veteran extension guys. What's the impact in New Orleans as far as with, certainly Brandon Ingram? How does that impact when you have Murphy, you've got Zion, you've got Murray, you've got CJ, your books are starting to, get up there, and then you've got Ingram, who's going to be a free agent here. But I like all 5 of them that are on the screen right now.
Yeah, I would say that if you're Moody and you're taking, quote, less, you're taking the mid-level, these kind of deals tend to be a little bit shorter because the player doesn't want to lock in too long a lower number in case they grow out of that. But also the team doesn't want to overcommit as well. So it's a negotiation to find that right number. So Kispert got a 3-year deal. And then if he succeeds, the team will keep him for a 4th. That's kind of the best way to look at it. So the agent is conceding that 4th year. So Kispert kills it. Maybe he's worth more money. The cap keeps growing 10% a year. Maybe the kind of money Kispert can get in a few years would be higher. The team is going to benefit by getting that extra year, whereas Sengun gets that extra year out earlier so that he can explore the market because he took a little bit less. I thought Sengun would get more than Green. It looks like Green got more because he took a shorter deal. I don't fully understand the Green one. I'm going to have to get back to you all after I talk to some people maybe with the Rockets if they ever talk to me about that sort of thing. And then Murphy is a really good player. He's not a starter yet, but he's considered when I talk to just about anybody who's with any team that he's a starter caliber player and probably should be starting for the Pelicans. And then I actually have Jalen Johnson as my most improved player of the year this year. He didn't get any real votes last year, so I think he'll jump up to over 20 points a game. I think if Sharp wasn't hurt, Shaedon Sharp, I think he and Jalen would be fighting neck and neck for that. But the injury is what put that over the top in my feverish mind. So let's go on to the next slide and see what we got. So these are the players who did not get extended. Some of them aren't on this list because I'm trying to think, some players didn't even make it this far in terms of getting all the way through 3 years. I have to check if there's anybody who is no longer in the league, or at least not on their rookie scale. Some of these players are, I think Grimes was somebody who could have been extended by Dallas. I think that was in the realm of possibility. I think Cam Thomas, it didn't make sense for the Nets to extend him yet because they have all the flexibility. They have basically a monopoly on cap space. So why eat into that? And I don't know that Springer or Sharp or Aldama, Mitchell, Zaire have proven, or Duarte have proven to be even rotation players necessarily. Aldama is certainly, but haven't necessarily established themselves as we're going to make big investments. Jackson is an important piece potentially on the Pacers, but he is also pretty slight in terms of height and build. And so maybe if he's a power forward or an undersized center, maybe they're not ready to invest. The interesting ones to me are Giddey and Kuminga, as and Cam's a great scorer, but in terms of productive players, Kuminga is a very valuable part of the rotation of the Warriors, and Giddey is he helped the Thunder get to the playoffs in a new situation with Chicago. What do you see as the future with the two of them? Why don't we start with Steven again with Giddey and Kuminga? What stands out on in terms of their pathway forward?
Yeah, so when you look at Josh Giddey, I mean, you traded Alex Caruso to get Josh Giddey. Alex Caruso, I think, is one of the better perimeter defenders, lead by example guys in the league. So when you do that, I think that shows me that you're intent on having Josh Giddey being a part of your future. So for them not to get a deal done, um, an extension done, I think kind of surprised me a little bit. I don't know what the number is that his camp wants versus what Chicago wants and kind of how they're going about that. But uh, yeah, that really surprised me just because I felt like that was Chicago's move signaling like, hey, we want this guy to be like a part of our ongoing future. And then as far as Golden State with Kuminga, I think we saw him take a pretty big jump. I think especially with the issues that Wiggins had last year, the personal stuff and the on court stuff. I just don't. I thought that they were going to invest more into Kuminga. I think a lot of the stuff probably is just price point negotiations not being met on both sides. I think it just takes two to tango with that stuff. Um, so they both kind of surprised me. Honestly, Aldama surprised me too. I mean, when you look at the past 2 years, he started in 55 games. So with that being said, I mean, they were definitely hurt. Memphis has had its injury slash suspension issues over the past couple of years. But if you're starting at 55 games over 2 seasons, to me, that signals that you're at least going to be somewhere in the rotation. So again, I just think that might just be his camp and his agent saying we want more than what the team is willing to give. Probably similarly with Josh Giddey and Jonathan Kuminga, and then just not agreeing on something.
It's given the dearth of cap room, it's certainly a move, or the absence of a move to not take a deal. Go ahead, Bobby. Tell me what you think about what jumps out.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly I think if Josh Giddey was in a Chicago Bulls uniform last year and had played for them in a year they had more of a year of evaluation seeing him up front. I think it's a lot easier to commit big money to him. I know the number that's been floated out that he was looking at was that Emmanuel Quickly contract that he signed in Toronto, which was like 5 for like 162, I think 32 and a half across the board, which was a big number. It's a big number for a restricted free agent. Kuminga certainly betting on himself. I think there's probably two ways to look at it, that he will probably be a trade candidate if Golden State stumbles this year. He's probably their best trade asset because whoever acquires him will get in a restricted free agent and sign him, or he'll outperform basically what he did last year, and Golden State will have to reward him. So I thought Kuminga's number, if there was an extension, would have been probably similar to where maybe Jalen Johnson came in, or somewhere around that number. Probably the other guy that probably stands out is people are probably wondering why Cam Thomas didn't get extended, which was in Brooklyn. And Brooklyn, as Eric has talked about, is really the lone team that has significant cap space next year. And because Thomas was picked in the late 20s, his cap hold that free agents have is really low. Like it's like, I think like $12 million. He's got a cap hold here. So there was no sense of extending him for $20 million plus and then lose that, even if it's $10 million in savings here. I think he'll have a good year, probably be one of the top players in scoring this year, just based on a Brooklyn team that's, certainly rebuilding here. But yeah, that's kind of my thought. I thought, and this is kind of an apron rule, is that because I'm looking at Jaden Springer right now, and we're going to talk about the roster rules a little bit with Boston. The apron rules are impacting teams that are second apron teams that have the inability to send out cash in a trade. We saw Sacramento trade McDaniels to San Antonio and attach cash and a second round pick. But we saw Minnesota waive Keita Bates-Diop because they can't attach cash in a trade. I'm sure Boston would have loved to keep Lonnie Walker and maybe find a home for Jaden Springer if they could have attached cash in trade. And teams that are in the second apron aren't allowed to do that.
Yes, sir. It's again, it's the rules are easier to make trades almost across the board if you have low team salary. But as you get up to these upper echelons of payroll, it gets very difficult to make trades. And that's purposefully trying to penalize the teams that overspend to try to normalize spending to make sure teams don't spend too little. There's some other rules regarding that, and that they don't spend too much. Try to get everyone in the same relative range. In the case of Giddey, you mentioned Quickly. Quickly is an interesting case where last year, what I had heard, and the truth is always a little different than from what we hear outside of the actual conversations, but that he was looking for about 25 million from the Knicks, and the Knicks were at about 20. And so that's got to be really difficult to turn down a deal, 4 or 5 year deal starting at $20 million. Let's say it's 100 million. Let's just make up a number. Say turn down 100 million and just go into the season and hope it works out. They were able to get a trade, both sides, but from the Quickly side, they got a trade to a place that was willing to pay him, and then he got 32 flat. He got a great deal. He got more than if he had taken the 25 that theoretically he was seeking the year before. So if you're Giddey and you look at that, you're banking that you've already been traded to the team and they're the ones who are going to pay you, or you're going to get Brooklyn to pay you. And really that's the only option because no one else has that kind of money. Same with Kuminga. You're banking on more money somewhere. And I guess the Golden State couldn't pay him. And we do have some cases where teams did wait and then they paid, and they paid handsomely. So I think these stories are not yet written, but I do think Kuminga is as you mentioned, Bobby, a very possible trade piece. I did mention in a Bleacher article, they asked me, could the Warriors trade for Jimmy Butler? Is that technically possible? And it is. And one of the pieces would be Kuminga, or even if Giannis decides to force his way out, you could see Kuminga being the key piece along with Wiggins in some sort of trade to make that happen. So maybe it's easier to do that before he's extended so that the team that gets him can then negotiate with all the leverage, especially when, again, no one has any money this summer but the Nets, and everybody else who doesn't have money, the most they have is maybe $14-ish million starting. So very curious to see how this all plays out, but at least we know the answers as of right now, as of today. So let's go on to the next slide and then see where it takes us, and we're going to get to Q&A soon. All right, Bobby, what are we looking at here? These are the veteran extensions?
Yeah, this is the group of, I tweeted out earlier, we saw 2.6 billion in veteran extensions this offseason. Like, extensions are the new free agency. The ability to extend with your team and get guaranteed money, whether you're a rookie, which was at 1.5 billion in extensions in rookies. And then with this group, this is the group of players that all extended. The most recent one was Aaron Gordon, as you can see on the bottom right there, for 104. Jaden Hardy, certainly 3 for $18 million. But this is the group of players that most could have been free agents in the upcoming offseason here, but elected to take guaranteed money right now.
Yeah, I saw the Jalen one, and people were very excited about how he did the Knicks a solid to take less money, but like, he took the most he could get and guaranteed himself 156 million and doesn't have to worry about Tibbs, who plays his guys into the ground. Not that it's not successful, but he burns guys out. And I hope Jalen Brunson has a long, healthy career, but we've taken away some of that risk. So he turned away future money, but there's always the chase of the most or more that you can lose track of, like, reality. Like, yeah, if you're worried about the most, you would take a 1-year deal every year and get a max that you could each 1 year, because the cap's going up faster than salaries. If salaries climb by 8%, cap climbs by 10. You'd be doing 1-year deals every year. But I don't think that's realistic, obviously. And Steven, I'm curious what your thought is. Is there anything on this list dating all the way back to July that surprised you, you agree with vehemently or oppose vehemently, or anywhere in between?
Yeah, there's a couple that kind of stick out to me. I think the first one that just is glaring is Steph Curry's 1 year. for 63 million. I think you're looking at Steph. He's going to be 37 years old this upcoming season. Uh, I always look at numbers like that, especially when it's short deals added on to the end. On extensions, like, are we going to see more of Steph Curry after this deal's over? Is he going to come back? And this is the last of Steph Curry we're going to see. And I think that's something, especially with a player of his caliber that does as much as he does with his age and with his accomplishments that he's done in this league. That's always just something to keep an eye out for. And then also, I think a big one for me too, Jose Alvarado's deal was huge. Um, the 2 for 9, I think, especially when you look at Dyson Daniels being gone to Atlanta this past offseason. I think you're going to see Jose Alvarado probably have a really good year for the Pelicans, and for them to be able to lock him in for 2 additional seasons, I think is huge, especially for that price point, and the impact that he has while he's on the court.
Yeah, I don't like it from an agent point of view as much. Again, it's the corollary of you love it for the team side, like $4.5 million. Like you probably could have gotten that because teams have that money. Whereas if it's 20 million, teams don't have 20 million. So that's a different story. But 4.5, and it's a short deal. But I have some concerns about it. I wonder about, like, again, we have, I think, another couple hours. To me, Kevin Durant and Steph Curry are in the same boat. Like, if you're Phoenix and you have the ability to add one more year to to KD, like, aren't you going to do that? I mean, why wouldn't you? Again, it's only 1 year, but if it's like $60-ish million, I'd have to look at the exact number. Why wouldn't KD want that for a year? You would think he would, and maybe he doesn't. I can't speak for KD, but logically, like, you can get today another 60-something million guaranteed to fit, and you're committed for 3 years in Phoenix. That's the most they can give him, by the way. They can't, over 38 rule, they can't go beyond that. So I predicted that would go through. So I'm hoping that one goes through at the deadline because I like to be right. We'll see if that happens. We have another hour or so. So let's go on to the next slide and see what else we have in store. We have some other, these are players who now have to wait because yes, they have the additional year. So what are your thoughts here, Bobby, on these gentlemen?
Yeah, I mean, this is the group of players that have 2 years left, a straight 2 years, now have to wait into the off season to go out and do an extension. I think Eric mentioned Durant, which was certainly interesting as far as the ability to add another year, which is appealing. I think the goal for him was to get into next offseason, then he can go for 2 years because of the over 38 rule. I think for De'Aaron Fox, I think it's the ability to maybe earn all NBA for him. He could sign for, I think, 5 for $345 if he does. Jaren Jackson Jr. has 2 years left. Some of these players are hurt a little bit. Jackson Jr. is an interesting case when he signed his rookie extension. And it's an extension that helps the team, but when you decline the extension, it hurts you from the ability to extend it. Like one of the rules, and I don't know how you guys feel, Eric and Steven, was that teams had said, like, well, why not with extension players, instead of 140%, you can extend for what their bird rights are. So if you're Jaren Jackson Jr., instead of extending 140% off 23 million, and you're limited, why can't you just extend for 35% or whatever, 30% of the salary cap when it's allowable? That maybe gives you a little bit more flexibility here. So, Mikal Bridges is another guy on this list because he was traded. He was limited to only 2 additional years, and he was capped as far as the percentage increase with that here. So no big surprises. I thought maybe Norman Powell. Right. I mean, the Clippers have been pretty aggressive, but I think, Powell's at a pretty high number. I mean, I think it's a little bit different than Terrence Mann and Ivica Zubac. But no, I wasn't really surprised that this group did not get extended.
Yeah, I don't think there's anyone. I mean, again, fans might look at, like, of course, the Knicks want to keep Bridges. the Grizzlies presumably want to keep Jaren Jackson. Some of it's just timing and situation. And like Marcus Smart is hurt a lot. So is Robert Williams and Mitchell Robinson. So it just doesn't make sense. KD is the one. And again, if he wants to wait and get a 2-year deal and Phoenix is willing to give him that, sure. And then, Atlanta with Trey, they're not really there. I don't think Trey's there. I don't think they would offer that right now based on the uncertainty. The Clippers are sort of aggressive, but also hesitant. Like keeping Terrence Mann is somebody that is young enough that they believe is worth keeping a long time. Does a lot. He can impact the game without scoring. Zubats is one of the better serviceable big men in the league, starting centers. He's not like an all-star or anything, although I think he was at some point. Was he an all-star? I forget. Was he like a Chris Kaman type all-star? I don't know, maybe not. Steven, what anything jump out? Anything you want to add to on this list?
Yeah, I think there's 3 names here for me. I think Dean Wade is someone that's kind of grown in that Cleveland system for a while. Started a career high 32 games last year for them. I think he wouldn't expect a big number, but I think that's someone that I would have looked at as Cleveland trying to find a way to keep a little bit longer.
Sure.
Daniel Gafford, I think, his impact that he had on their way to the finals, I think that they're definitely moving forward with Derek Lively starting at center. But I think that the combination of having the 2 of them both with Luka always giving him a lot of threat on the floor, I think was huge for them last season. I think that really helped change like the needle or moves the needle a little bit for them. And then an interesting one that I don't know if it should have gotten done, it didn't, but maybe you could make the case. Michael Porter Jr. in Denver. I think when you talk about Denver's situation with KCP being gone, I think it's going to be a complete different team we're going to see next year. I don't think it's going to be the exact same. I think especially with KCP being the head of their snake defensively, I don't think they have that really right now. I think, Peyton Watson maybe can make like a little bit of a case, but it's going to be interesting to see how they tackle that. But I think when you talk about keeping talent in home, especially with Jokic's prime being right now, I'm assuming right now he could be way better, but with kind of keeping what they have there in Denver, that kind of is one that I would say maybe they could have looked at, but I mean, they definitely did the due diligence, but I also don't know if Michael Porter Jr. would have accepted a number that I probably would have I think he should have gotten.
Right.
So that's a whole nother conversation also.
Right. He has
but I
2
think,
more years on top of this, so we're talking like way down the line too.
yeah, but those 3 I think are the 3 that really stand out to me the most. I think to Bobby's point, like a lot of the guys on here definitely have had injury issues. I mean, we were just talking about Dean Wade. Dean Wade hasn't played 60 games since 2020, 2021. And like kind of going down the list, say like quite a few other guys on here have had their issues with that as well, especially Robert Williams. So that's a good thing definitely to look at is availability, because why would we extend you for longer periods if you're not going to be on the court?
Got it. Well, let's take a look at the players who are still extension eligible. So let's jump to the next slide. And because, again, the deadline is only for players who have 1 or more years left. These are players who, this was not the deadline day. Jaden Hardy would have been on this list. He extended. We have a number of players that are still eligible. They're going to be eligible all year. And some of them may extend. Some of them definitely won't. Why don't we go back to you, Steven, and just get your thoughts. Is there anyone on this list that jumps out? John Collins, plural. Is there anybody on this list who is maybe likely, at least theoretically, to get an extension before the end of the year, before June, end of June?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Rudy Gobert, I think that's the one that stands out the most to me, like right away at least. I think moving Cat signifies that I think that they're putting a lot of trust into Rudy for quite a bit of time. And I think with that, I think you look at extension talks with them, see if you can keep him for as long as you can. especially with Ant. I think I think it's good to have solid rim protection like Rudy Gobert, which very few people in the league can offer, because it allows Ant to be more aggressive defensively. If Ant can pressure more on the ball, if Ant can kind of, have those defensive mistakes, quote unquote, um, that are him really being a dog defensively. I think there's going to be times where he's going to get beat off the dribble a little bit when you want to kind of have rim protection behind him.
Mhm.
I think that's something that very, very few people in the league can offer, like Rudy Gobert can, which is probably why they chose to kind of stick with that. So I think that's something that sticks out big to me. I'm very, very interested to see what Steven Adams looks like with Houston this year. I know they said that he is doing pretty well with his injury recovery, and so with him kind of playing backup to Sengun, I'd be very curious to kind of see how that goes. That's very interesting. And then probably last, I'd probably say is Al Horford. I think with his age, I don't know if we're going to see Al Horford continue to play or, kind of how that's going to go or what his plans are. But with Boston's situation financially, I think that's something that we want to keep an eye on for sure.
All right, Bobby. Thank you, Bobby. What are your thoughts? Anyone jump out as a candidate to extend?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think certainly the big names as Gobert is interesting just because would he decline his option and extend at a lower number? Right? Like, so I think he's at 46 million next year. I think would he drop to 38 and then get more guaranteed money down the road? Something like that. I think that's certainly an interesting one. I think some of the ones, Alex Caruso is extension eligible, but is allowed to extend for a bigger number in December when that 6-month restriction comes off. That's probably one that to keep an eye on. Certainly the big names, as we've mentioned, whether it be Brandon Ingram or I don't see anything with Jimmy Butler, is pretty interesting. Larry Nance Jr. might be a little bit of a wild card, just based on a veteran presence type thing there. But Bobby Portis is another one. It's an interesting name there, who's on a really good contract. So I think we will see a little bit of a slow period though with some of these names on here.
Yeah, I think the most interesting, of course, is Jimmy, simply because if they're not going to extend him, then do they want him on the books next year at 52 million? What is the direction of the Heat? Are they going to continue down this path where they're good enough to maybe get to the finals, which is incredible? But I think they sort of maxed out their potential on who they are. They're going a little younger with Jaquez and Jovic and Ware and some of these younger guys. It may be time to start to move away from Jimmy. And if that's the case, then do you want his 52 on your? It's most likely that he opts in. Jimmy could do something like you said with Gobert, which is opt out, take less, take a longer deal. I don't know if that's Jimmy's personality to do that or not. I haven't seen any momentum towards them resolving that. And so I'm curious to see, like, does Jimmy end up being the guy on this list that is moved? Some of these guys obviously aren't going to be extended, Ben Simmons, whatnot. I think Ingram is the other fascinating one because as you mentioned earlier in the show, I think Bobby mentioned this, like you're investing in Trey Murphy. I don't believe, from when I've heard, they value CJ more than just what he does necessarily on the court, just for who he is as leader of the players union, a great veteran, somebody that represents the organization well. So you might look at his number and say, well, he's older than everybody else. They'll get out of CJ to make room for Ingram. I don't know if the Pelicans are 100% convinced that Ingram Zion works, and you sort of have Trey Murphy potentially able to slide in and replace him in that starting group. So I think that's a story that is not yet written, but one to keep an eye on. So I think we are near the end of our prepared material. Let's go to the next slide, and then we'll get to the Q&A. So these are just some of the key roster decisions. Bobby, why don't you get into some of these? These were
I mean, so these we just kind of pulled out 3. certainly Boston waiving Lonnie Walker over the weekend to keep 14 players. The Celtics are a tax team. They're an apron team, second apron team. Certainly financial driven. Walker played pretty decent, pretty good actually in the preseason here. I would say Minnesota keeping PJ Dozier, who's on a partial guarantee, and then waiving Keita Bates-Diop, whose contract is fully guaranteed at $2.6 million. You could have certainly made the argument to keep Bates-Diop and waive Dozier. And then New York's going to be the most fascinating thing moving forward. So here's the balancing of basically pulling out the big calculator to try to balance the staying under the second apron and also carry 14 players. So New York elected to waive Landry Shamet. They're 3.55 million below the second apron. They have to remain below that number because of the Mikal Bridges trade. The likelihood is that New York's going to enter the regular season with 12 players on their roster, technically 10 that are healthy. And then when you have their two-way players, which are another, I think Kevin McCullough is still out. So you have a couple two-way players here. Their only true center is Jericho Sims on this roster behind Karl Anthony Towns. It's going to be fascinating because there are rules in place, and Eric knows this, that you have to hit that 14 number. Like you just can't carry 12 players for the whole year. And I think New York's going to be interesting as far as kind of that juggling act, as far as signing players and trying to stay under that second apron number.
Yeah, Santos last year with the Warriors was an example of, like, the Warriors started at 13. They waited a couple of weeks. You're allowed to be below the minimum for 2 weeks. So the Warriors pushed it to the deadline, signed Santos, and it gave them just a tiny bit of wiggle room. I think the Knicks are going to play this game for as long as possible to massage their numbers just right. The Wolves could have, I think I tweeted on this, like they could have traded a second round pick or something to get out of Bates' job if they really wanted to.
Yeah.
But if you're willing to eat the money. That's better than giving up assets, right? Draft capital. It just depends on the team. Some teams are very much focused on making sure that they're not throwing away money. And when we say, oh, he wasn't making that much with their tax, it might have been, it was like $14 million in dead money if you calculate the tax. So I haven't run it in a minute, but it's a lot more than just his salary. And I like that you mentioned here that most of the players, what is unique about the NBA, or at least compared to like the NFL, is that contracts, generally speaking, are guaranteed. And there are end of bench guys, end of rotation guys who might have non-guaranteed money. That's more of a leverage thing. And all that money will guarantee at a minimum by January the 10th. They have to be cut by January 7th. So most of the money in the NBA is guaranteed. That's something that the NBPA has fought long and hard to make sure that happens. So do you have any thoughts on these end of these key roster decisions, Steven, before the season?
Yeah, I mean, the Lonnie Walker one, it's interesting. I don't think he's going to play for Maine. I could be wrong, but I know that he has that option. I also know that I saw he was talking to some teams overseas as well. So just having him be there is very interesting. I am very curious if he would ever be interested in a two-way spot. I don't know if he would, or kind of how.
I don't think he's eligible.
Yeah. Let's see,
I don't think he's eligible because he's got 6 years.
5 or 6?
5 or 6 years. Okay. Yeah. No, he'd be awesome.
Gotcha.
That's one rule I would love for them to expand a little bit, is the flexibility to have, and I know why the rule is the rule, but the flexibility to have
6 years of service.
Gotcha.
Older players on two-way contracts.
Yeah, a two-way, just for reference for those listening, Lonnie Walker can go play for the Maine Red Claws. He signed what's called an Exhibit 10, and he would get, if he's there for 60 days, excuse me, he would get about, $77,500 in a bonus from the Celtics. And then he would get, if he was with the Red Claws for the entire year, about 41 or 42, I don't know the exact number, in that range this season. So about 115,000. And he's a player that's used to being in the NBA earning at least the minimum, which is certainly closer to 2 million, not exactly. So I guess for him, it'd be even over what is 6 years of service. So for him, the minimum would be higher than that. It would be 2.6 million. So he's probably not somebody who's like, yeah, I'll go play for 100 or so thousand in the G League. And even if he doesn't play and just waits around, maybe a roster spot opens up. And maybe a roster spot opens up. I mean, the Celtics do have a roster spot, so maybe over time they sign him when his salary is a little bit lower prorated. So before we go to the last slide, which I think is wrapping it up, I figured we'd take a look and get to some of these questions here. We have quite a few in the Q&A. So Mason asks, and we've already sort of touched on this, expect the Knicks to sign 10-day contracts to get to 14 players after the 2-week window. Actually, you can't sign 10-day contracts yet. You have to wait until, was it January?
I think 5th? 5th?
Yeah, I think it's the 5th.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can't sign them yet unless there's a hardship. But a hardship takes a while to get to. So I think Memphis last year had a bunch of hardship 10 days because of injury and all their situation. But in a normal situation, so what they can do is they can sign players after the 2 weeks, as we mentioned, and then they could cut those players after a certain point. There's an aggregate. I think, isn't there an aggregate of how long you can be below 14 players? I think there's you can't keep doing it. I think there's an aggregate.
Yeah, well, it's a total of 28 days, right? So you're.
Yeah, so it's not like they can sign somebody and then. So it could mean trading somebody. I don't know. I'd have to run the proration based on waiting those days. But if you say well, they don't have anyone they want to trade, because the problem is like Jericho Sims is 2.1. You trade for someone, you'd have to. One thing they could do is I guess the answer here that I would do to get around this would be, was it Huckporty?
Yeah, you could convert him.
McCullough. Because they were drafted, they would be 1.1 million, 1.2 million as rookies. Whereas if you sign somebody, let's say you sign Joe Blow, somebody who's not even an NBA prospect, who's a rookie, they sign Bobby and they say, Bobby, we just want you to wear a uniform so we can get to the minimum. We're never going to play you. That doesn't make sense. So the rules would be that they'd be taxed like Bobby was a 2-year vet min, which is 2.1. So there's no difference in signing Bobby versus signing an actual NBA player, Lonnie Walker, for instance. And so, yeah, I think if they're stuck, converting those players who were drafted is the solution to getting to 14. So that should answer that one. A former student, very good one, in Mezen. This is a tough one. So I think we'll probably have to go to Bobby on this one. What is a reasonable contract for Ingram from Anonymous?
Ooh, man.
Reasonable is a tough word.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can make if Brandon Ingram has an all-star year, I think you can make the argument that he's a max type player here. I think reasonable because he's started. It's really dependent on who the team is, right? You look at where New Orleans is right now with the Trey Murphy extension. They're $31 million below the luxury tax, right? Is Brandon Ingram going to sign for $27 million? No. If he was traded to Brooklyn, for example, is he going to extend for 208 after 6 months? Possible, I think it's just circumstantial, depending on the circumstances here, as far as what a reasonable contract number is based on what team he is on.
It's all contextual, and it's very individualistic to the player and the team and their situation, and then also the market and who else is offering what. So it's very hard to sort of what is a fair number, a right number, a reasonable number. These are vague. I'm just going to knock this one out because it's a little off topic, but Alexander is asking, what are the Blazers doing with Sharp, Simmons, and Scoot? Seems a ton of overlap. is the plan to trade 1 or 3 or even 2? I just don't think they have enough information yet because all players are still young, even Simons. I think there's one too many M's in there. I just think they need some time to evaluate that, and there's no rush. If they were to move one, you would say they'd probably move the oldest and the most expensive, which is Simons, but I don't think that story's been written yet. All right, so I think we've touched on this. Well, Alexander, just a comment. I don't think this is a question. I guess, Steven, I'll ask you this. This is from Alexander. Why is Lonnie Walker not in the league? He says, I get the injury concern. This is from the same person, Alexander. Or he might actually be a different Alexander. But what is keeping Lonnie from being on a team?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard, I feel like, especially when you talk about guys that get full contracts on teams. I mean, there's a lot of guys, especially when you look at the G League, that are very good, that probably aren't anywhere close to getting an actual NBA contract. And I think Lonnie Walker's probably in a similar boat. A lot of it's really circumstance too, where you are, who has what available, and kind of like what we talked about earlier, takes two to tango, right? Lonnie has to want to go somewhere. His camp has to want to put him somewhere, but also somewhere has to want to take up a spot to put Lonnie on the team. So injuries definitely can play a part in that, without question. But you have to kind of look at where teams are, and what they're willing to do with their final spots in order for them to actually want to put him on the team. So a lot of times it's not really a knock on Lonnie or his ability. It's more of a factor of, kind of where we are as a team, and does it make sense to put him here when we can maybe put someone who's a little bit younger that we can maybe develop a little bit, send to our G League team if we need to for the end of the roster spot, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, I think Lonnie is, unfortunately, if you look at his track record, his first month of the season, he's an all-star. The second month of the season, he's hurt. The third month of the season, he's not quite back to that form. And then maybe he has some flashes the rest of the way. And it's sort of been a consistent trend over the course of his career. And so, like, at some point, a player like him has to be consistent. I think coaches, they want to know what they're going to get. Are they going to get a guy who's going to average 20 a game? Or are they going to get somebody, what else does he do if he doesn't do that? And is he a great defender? Is he a great rebounder, great screen setter, great passer? So I think that he hasn't quite established enough consistency. I do like him as a player. I like him as a person from the little time I got around him with the Lakers, covering the Lakers. But yeah, I think there's a lot of competition, and we get at least 100 new players in every year. Not everyone makes it. 60 drafted players, a bunch of free agents that were undiscovered two ways, even more, maybe 2-3. I mean, the amount of contracts that get signed to Exhibit 10s is a crazy amount. All right, so let's Bobby, there's two questions here I think we can knock off. I don't know how to pronounce this. Obafemi is asking how much will the salary cap go up next year with the new TV deal? And then I think someone else asked something similar. Here it is. Duncan, how do you weigh the potential probable increase in future cap years? TV revenue is going up by 2.5 to 3 times, so it seems reasonably likely you could get year-over-year increases that exceed 8%. So what is going to happen with the new TV deal with the cap? Is it just going to jump up crazy, crazy numbers like it did in 2016? You want to go ahead and answer that first?
Yeah, I mean, we're limited at 10%, right? I mean, we're basically kind of, the cap can't increase more than 10%, nor can it decrease from the prior year here. So we are kind of, we're not going to see a 2016 where this thing is going to skyrocket through the roof and expanding. I even talking to some teams, we're going to see 10% increase next year, but some teams are kind of a little bit pessimistic that we're going to see a full 10% jump every year, even with this TV deal that's going to come in. If 10% increases every year, the cap numbers are going to be astronomical, right? That's just as the cap grows, so the salaries grow here. But it is capped at 10% there.
Yes, it didn't used to be capped at that number, and they've instituted that as a permanent, at least for the duration of the CBA, is a temporary permanent change in the rules. So you can't go crazy with a cap. All right, let's go to Steven on this one. Mohammed is asking, who do you think had the best offseason?
Who do I think had the best offseason financially,
I mean,
or would
how about just best in basketball?
um I mean, if we're kind of just looking at accomplishments, I don't know if this is like fair to say, but LeBron James, I think adding on another gold medal, I think was huge for his legacy and kind of going forward with that. But if we're talking about contract wise, I mean, going over Jalen Green stuff today, like that to me was probably by far the best when you're talking about
Players.
setting yourself up. Yeah, player salary, financials, and not only just having the option of being locked down for an additional 3 years in the city that drafted you, but also, having the ability to leave a little bit early if you explode, have a great time, or if you even like if you're not if he ends up having issues in Houston, that's a whole another thing I don't think people are thinking about with the player option. He
Mhm.
can leave
Yeah.
early. He doesn't have to wait. He doesn't have to go through that whole I need to get traded. Like that whole thing is a whole it weighs you down. So for him to be able to do that, I think by far was the best contract from a player standpoint that we got to see throughout this entire summer, in my opinion.
Okay, Bobby, what about on the team side? Thank you, Stevie. He just sent, he basically said it on the player side. What do you think on the team side? Who did the best, either or kind of both, like either financially or just in improving their team?
I mean, I thought. I mean, listen, I actually like what Golden State did just because it gave more roster balance. Instead of having one big contract with Clay and you have three smaller pieces with D'Anthony Melton, Kyle Anderson, and Buddy Hield. Will it get him out of that playing mix? We'll see. I mean, you know, New York kind of put all their eggs in the basket once they did the Mikal Bridges trade, and it was like, okay, now we have to keep on adding and adding, and it's amazing how one move, which was Isaiah Hartenstein going to Oklahoma City, kind of created a domino effect for them because then like Mitchell Robinson's hurt, and now we don't have a center, and now we've got to trade two players to get us. It created all these different. It created all these different things. I think the most fascinating study would be when a team goes all in on something, like what are their next like 3 or 4 moves? Because it feels like it's like you keep on like double down until you basically you can't double down any more here. But I listen, I as I said, I did like what Golden State was able to do just because it made sense it made more sense financially and it made sense kind of from a roster standpoint.
Sure, sure. As far as it's hard to argue with New York as like a team that maybe is best off, but it really depends on what your opinion is of Cat as like, is he a defensive anchor, and then can Tibbs build a team around him with the players that they have that can offset what he does and what he doesn't do as a defender. I thought Oklahoma City got better, and there's certainly we could spend another hour and a half just going over like who did well. So I don't want to get too deep into that. I want to jump through. I'm going to shotgun through a couple of quick questions here. One question was, this is also from Obafemi, how is the vet min determined? It's going to rise with the cap. So as the cap rises, if it rises 10%, the minimum, it is also tiered based on how many years you've been in the league. So if you've been in for a rookie, maybe you're making 1-1. If you're a vet, maybe you're making a 10-year vet, maybe 3-3. So the range depends on that. Farzad is asking about the Thunder's ability to keep their core group together, and does the CBA negatively impact that? Like there's a point where every team, at some point, you have to pay everybody. It can get very difficult, but the way they've gone about it has been very diligent, and so they're paying most of their money up front to Hartenstein. It drops a little bit, and then they can get out of them after. So they have them locked in for 2 years. The third year is a team option. So if payroll gets too high, they can get out of them. Same with Dort. They can get out of them. So when the money is due for Chet, they might need to make some decisions there as well. But generally speaking, they're in a very strong position to handle their situation for the immediate future and at least the next few years. Let's see here. Okay, I think that we can answer this one. This is a good one to answer. This is from, oh boy. I'm just going to say it's from Sir because I don't want to mess up the name. It says Sir something. Doesn't SBC offer the same value of this business classroom, maybe online or virtual, for interested parties like a youth development coach in Johannesburg, South Africa? You're interested in scouting, video coordination, analytics, and player development. We are always evolving, and so our main program is in July in Summer League in Las Vegas, but we do offer throughout the year some virtual programs. It fluctuates year to year, and we don't have anything to announce today, but we have done virtual programs before, so it doesn't matter where you're coming in from. And so it is absolutely in consideration and something we will get back to you on. But the goal of Sports Business Classroom is to help educate people who are interested in getting into the business of basketball and learn how to either master your craft or network or help build up your connections, get noticed. So reach out to us privately and we will certainly chat with you about that. So I always notice, Bobby and Steven, as we go, like as many questions as we answer, there are new ones that come in. So it'll go on forever. So I want to try to answer all of them, but I also don't want to be here all day. And I also have some stuff to write. So I'll throw these out to either of you to just answer. We don't have to go too long. And I think this is a good one for you, Steven. This is also from Mohammed. Yep. What are some of the qualities factors you guys look for when categorizing players? For instance, what do you look for to decide if a player is a franchise player?
I think two things for me. I think impact is one thing, or maybe three things. So impact is huge for me. What do you do on the floor to impact winning specifically? There are a lot of players that are very talented that can throw up very empty stats. But for me, that's huge. Like if you're gonna throw up empty stats, but you're not helping people get better, which leads into my second point. I think that's something that like I probably would shy away from for a franchise player. Leading into number two, I think your ability to help make your teammates get better. I think when you look at all the franchise guys, you look at, and there's only a handful of them, but when you look at LeBron, you look at Steph Curry, you look at Kevin Durant, all those guys constantly elevate the play of their teammates while they're on the floor. And that to me is huge as a starting point for a franchise guy. And then lastly, how much of a buy-in are you to the community? I think that's something that's very overlooked. I think when you have a guy that you're committing long-term financial resources to, how much do they like being in your market and how much are they willing to contribute to the community from a resource standpoint, helping out with different events, that type of stuff. I think that's very huge and important when it comes to having to be the face of your franchise.
Thank you. It's interesting. I always find those kind of questions really fascinating, which is why I always like picking Steven's brain because he adds a very different point of view on this whole thing. I'm a little bit more on the number side and strategy side. I would do a little bit more on the agent side, but to hear the team side is really fascinating. I'm going to answer this one live. This is Alex who's asking, can the delay on Trey point to leaving room for potential trade after the All-Star break based on performance? I wouldn't jump to that conclusion. Certainly the Hawks may not be fully committed to Trey. And if a team wanted him, there could be a universe in which they would pivot away from him. But he's still under contract for 43 this year, 46 the next year, and has an option for 49 the year after that. So there's no rush. And so when you have a situation where you have a team that's been mediocre for both sides, like what's the rush? Maybe Trey would want more money, but maybe he looks at his opportunity down the road where maybe he can get to a place if it's not Atlanta, where he can get more and be in the situation he wants to be. So it just may not be time to make that decision yet. Isaac Popper has a question about Ray J. They signed him, the Wizards, to a two-way and then waived him. Did they not know if Jared Butler would sign a two-way contract? Bobby, do you have any insight on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, Butler had a non-guaranteed contract. I think the curiosity is if he would maybe clear waivers. That was probably the little bit of the unknown there to be able to. I think the unknown, if he had better offers out there to sign with another team, or as I said, if he was going to be claimed. I think once he goes through waivers and he knows. Listen, he's been there over a year. He knows the system already. He kind of just fits right back in, but at a lesser salary that doesn't hit the cap.
I think someone told me, and I haven't seen it with my own eyes, that they gave Ray J a very small guarantee for just it was like $7,000 or something like that for just being under contract for a minute. Maybe the plan is to get him on their G League team, and it was too late to do an Exhibit 10, and I think someone else might have done an Exhibit 10. So I don't know. Whatever ends up, maybe they can get him on their G League team and he gets a little bit. Or maybe it was a favor for an agent. Sometimes there's little details like that. This is another one for Steven, I think, to answer this one. And Bobby, you can chime in if you feel the need. This is from Dave Glavin. Do teams have internal metrics score, basically some sort of technical measurement to track to assess how much a player should get paid, and how do teams balance current performance with future projections and negotiation? I'd like that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think teams definitely look at kind of like the value of positions and kind of where players are. I know that was something I worked at CAA for a little bit, and I know for sure that was something that we had an entire department for, from like an agent standpoint, was trying to see how much we should get guys paid and kind of measuring against what people at their position are valued. And that's something I think similar to what teams do. I mean, looking around the market to kind of see. I mean, at the end of the day, it's really competition, right? Like, who are you bidding against, and how much are your opponents willing to pay whoever you're wanting to pay before you decide on that number. And I think that is huge when you're talking about kind of crossing that with, I guess, like the overall value of different players that have already gotten paid that much. So, I mean, to answer in short, yes, there are people that look at that and kind of plan that out. In terms of an exact metric, I don't think there's like it's not kind of like a one shoe fits all type thing. But yeah, there are stuff that people look at with that for sure.
Bobby, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are internal metrics as far as, some teams use a computerized system that basically takes into account injuries, wear and tear of your body, analytics. It's like a whole combination where it kind of can spit out what projections you are, where you see. But I think at the end of the day, like the projection is based on like the market, who has cap space, is the player restricted, what are prior comps, maybe even to an extent here. I think a lot of that plays into who has cap space next year, the fear of losing that player. Do we have to overpay to keep him? I think there's the human, besides the analytical factor. I think there's the human factor of how you basically, listen, you don't need to tell me that LeBron James is a max player, right? Like the computer doesn't need probably what the computer would say, hey, he's going to be 40 in December. He doesn't deserve what he's going to be making. I think the eye test certainly plays a role. I mean, if you probably looked at Tyus Jones, for example, like with the Wizards, the computer probably would have said he was a $12 million player, for example. But the market said the Wizards determined that they weren't going to re-sign him and he loses bird rights and he becomes an unrestricted free agent. The market says he's probably a minimum because cap space has dried up and teams he wasn't willing to go sign with an exception on a team that was in a lottery So I think there's a lot of different ways on how you kind of value that.
Right. There is no one single way. And you mentioned earlier that Jalen Green might have been signed to a contract to be traded. That's a different equation, what you're going to pay him. You're now paying him, if that's the case, you're paying him an amount that makes him the right asset to trade. Not that because at this point, he's no longer, you're not considering him a player. You're signing him as a player to trade. So some of these get very complicated. I will say that there's another question here that is very similar from Anonymous that's asking the same question, more or less, determining how they got to Suggs. And again, it's the same case by case basis. Basically, everything that we just said applies there. There is no one singular answer. I can argue, wait, push him to face the market, tighten the screws. But like the Magic paid Isaac and they paid Cole. I'm talking about over the course of a period of time. They paid Wendell Carter Jr., they paid Franz, they paid everybody. They paid Goga. I mean, like, is Suggs going to be the only guy they don't pay? And then how does that impact him? And I think that goes to what you were saying earlier, Steven, about like the human side of it is like, how does he feel where everybody on the team got paid and is there for multiple years? He's the only one who has to go with that uncertainty. And does that impact the way he plays? Does he get more selfish? Does he try to, does he withdraw? Does he, who knows? And so I don't think there's a singular answer to any of these things. And I think that's why some teams do it really well and some teams do it poorly, because there is no singular answer to do it. We need to wrap up. We've got one more, and then we're gonna talk about a few more things, and then we'll try to wrap it up. I'll just answer this: are the Bulls tanking to protect their pick? Probably not initially, and then later, yes. So no today. What do you think?
I don't think anybody goes into the season saying we're going to tank games. I think you basically kind of get to like, I don't know, January or maybe the trade deadline and figure out kind of where you are from a roster standpoint. Like if they're like 25-10, they're not going to all of a sudden say, you know what, we got to start losing a lot of games so we can keep our pick. I think you just kind of let the season play out and see where you are.
All right. So before we wrap, there was one other question. These were actually emailed from, I think, Kusha. And so I don't know if we'll hit all of them, but I guess, Bobby, on the negotiation side, how do you work out things like incentives? How does that get hammered out? Okay, well, we're agreeing to a number, but let's make it, you have to do something first to get to that.
I would say incentives and contracts nowadays are teams are very hesitant to do and are not willing to do in most cases, just because unlikely bonuses count towards the apron. I think that's a big reason why we probably didn't. I don't think I heard any bonuses today, right? Like it's, as far as
nothing
bonus,
reported.
Yeah, nothing reported at least here. I think incentives there's two ways to look at it. You can put incentives in contracts to make the player feel good that when it's reported, it's 4 years, 130 million, and instead of it's really 120 million dollars, and there's bonuses in there that he'll never receive ever. All right, so you can say, hey, I got you 130. I think, as James said, like I think the trade bonuses are probably have definitely the more of the impact, which is a trade kicker in a contract. We saw that with DeJounte Murray. If you negotiate a trade bonus in your contract and that player gets traded, it's basically, whether it's 15% of the earnings left on his contract, that's a significant number. I mean, you could be getting $10 million or $11 million. So that's as good as, I'd rather have a trade bonus in my contract than, $1 million or for making the All-Star game. So I think everything is everything it's negotiated as far as how teams value that. And I think the incentive bonuses are not viewed as value to the teams anymore just because of the apron rules.
Yeah, the idea with an apron is you're agreeing to a limit in spending, and just the possibility that you may have to pay that money means that these unlikely incentives have to count against the apron. So if it's unlikely that, for instance, a player wins the NBA title on a lottery team, technically it's possible. And so if that lottery team has apron issues, those have to count. So I think what I want to do now is Jordan. Appreciate all the Jordan behind the scenes for making this all happen. I appreciate all the help. If you could put up the last slide, and I want to drop in a few remarks here. Number one, first of all, thank you all for watching. We can only do this if people want to watch. And we had a great turnout. I know that we did. I heard the numbers were really good. We had a lot of people interested. I know by the Q&A, it was great to see some former students and hopefully future students. You can always go to www.sportsbusinessclassroom.com and get more information about us. Follow us on our socials. You see them on the screen. Sports Biz Class on Twitter /X, and Sports Business Classroom on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. But I also want to say that we do work with the MBPA a bit to help people prepare for the agent's exam. If you are interested in becoming an agent and you want to apply for the testing, the application deadline is October 31st. So that's about 10 days from us recording this. And we don't work directly for the PA, but I thought that I would throw that in there. So if you are interested in becoming an agent and you hadn't noticed that the deadline is nearing, just go to the MBPA website and do your due diligence there. Also, this webinar will be available, as I mentioned earlier, as the SBC Audio Experience podcast, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. You can check it out later, refer to others, pass on to people if you so are inclined. Steven, I wanted to thank you. Steven is one of our instructors. I always learn from our conversations with you, Steven, a very different perspective. So is there anything else that you want to share about the deadline today, final roster decisions, any last minute thoughts about the season ahead of us?
No, I'm very excited. I think it's going to be a very good season. I think the Western Conference is going to be absolutely a madhouse this year. And I'm very excited to kind of see how that shapes out. One team I'm probably very, very interested in watching is Memphis, to kind of see where they are this year. I think that's going to be very fun. But yeah, no, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course, yeah, I don't know. Memphis Memphis fans hate me right now because I predicted a low win total because something feels off with the injuries there. I don't know. I could be wrong, but Memphis fans are very upset with me right now. Bobby, any last thoughts? Any on the season ahead or on the roster deadline?
Well, listen, we had a conference call with our writers at ESPN, and I said I think the theme this year is going to be less drama, more basketball. And then Karl Anthony Towns was traded 2 weeks later. So I do still think that is going to be the theme. That I think this could be the probably the most competitive years in both conferences that we've seen in a long time. I think you can make an argument. Certainly Boston's on an island by themselves, but I think the Eastern Conference is as deep as we've seen it. When we're talking about Orlando and Miami and Indiana and Cleveland as kind of the tier B teams, and they kind of don't get much love. And then of course, Steven's team and the teams that Eric cover out west, it's a juggernaut out there. I mean, the Western Conference is as good as we've seen. I think you can make an argument for 8 teams that could potentially come out of the Western Conference here. So it is exciting. The off season will be over in an hour and a half, and we get ready to go with 2 games on Tuesday night.
Yeah, I expect to be over at Lakers, Minnesota. I've already been to a preseason game with the Clippers. I'm excited. The one thing that I asked for across the board, which we unfortunately don't get, is for some health. I would love to see the best teams at full strength, the best competition in the world. A lot of times it's a war of attrition of who's still standing, but hopefully we'll get the best players in the world as healthy as possible. I think it's going to be a great season. I just watched the WNBA finals with my youngest daughter, and we had an absolute blast. So hopefully the NBA can live up to that kind of drama this season. So gentlemen, I appreciate you joining me today. And as always, we are with Sports Business Classroom. We don't have any programs yet to announce. We will be announcing some very soon, but we will be doing some webinars in the near future. And we are always around. So please reach out to us via our socials, and we will talk soon. So thank you for having us.
And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed our 106th episode. If you did, make sure to share this with your friends and colleagues, post it on social media, and subscribe and drop a review. Let us know you listened, and if you enjoyed the episode, tag us on your Instagram story at Sports Business Classroom. Let us know you're listening and what you thought about this episode. This episode is also brought to you by Hall Pass Media, a full-service marketing agency that specializes in brand consulting, event management, digital marketing, and creative design. For more information on Hall Pass Media, go to hallpassnetwork.com.